Alrighty, my friends, welcome back. Hello, hi, good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day you are choosing to watch these videos. So for our next either one or two videos, depending on time, we're going to investigate into now module 9.2 and look in oil and natural gas formation. So I do want to mention, and I forgot to mention this in the coal video, is that these videos are going to be not covering everything in the chapters that your book is. So do still be sure to read the book very carefully before you take the content quizzes this week. So now we're continuing on talking from fossil fuels in terms of coal, and now we're going to talk about some of the other non-renewable fossil fuels, this time focusing on oil and natural gas. And this is one that's kind of talked about perhaps more often. It's a large majority of kind of what we look at here in terms of electricity and other power uses. Okay, so this is a graphic from your book looking at oil and natural gas formation. So very, very similar to coal in that these things are made in low oxygen environments. So again, if there's not a lot of oxygen, there's not going to be a lot of decomposition that happens. So these things will then settle and not get decomposed, and basically it's like kind of continuing on to pile on to each other. So also similar to coal, oil and natural gas are formed in like a more moist environment, in this case the marine environments. So what happens here is we have marine organisms like plankton, which then that hang out near the surface and then die and fall. And then they get buried underneath various sediments. Again, lack of oxygen, not a lot of decomposers. And so then the remnants are then formed into oil and natural gas. So geologists, when they're looking for where you could drill for oil and natural gas, would be to look at and look for ancient marine rocks like shale, which actually provides a cap for oil, in this case on the right-hand side, which is kind of where you would see this here. And then they would also look for sandstone and limestone, which are a much more permeable rock. Remember, permeable would be how much can you get through, how much water could you get through, for example. And through that, then they can extract the oil. Shale also contains oil, but we weren't able to extract oil from the shale until modern technology came along, aka fracking, and then we could then start to extract oils and gases through shale, which is the industry that's kind of booming now, especially in the South. So again, kind of thinking back to this idea, you're like, Mallory, marine environments, this doesn't make any sense. How could the US, for example, have these environments? Well, I'll have a map for you to show that. But first, let's look at a global map and see where we have been able to find proven oil and natural gas reserves. This is also a figure from your book. So I want you to maybe pause the video or look in your book and kind of study this graphic for a little bit. One thing that's missing here is the Eurasia, the natural gas part of it got cut off, and so that should be 30%. But looking here, the brown is looking at oil proven reserves, and the blue is natural gas proven reserves. And then the kind of red things here are indicating shale and oil gas, which is an unconventional deposit. So I also want to mention this term proven simply means that there is the amount of fossil fuels that are known to exist and are economically feasible to extract using current technologies. So that's a really important point to make here. It's like, oh, we could have oil in other areas. However, it's not proven economically viable or feasible to extract from that region for whatever reason. So I want you to note that this map is also for continents like North America. This includes Canada and Mexico, and not for countries. So you can look further into specific countries, and we will actually here in just a moment, of kind of the extractions from each location. So generally, anywhere we used to find oil was in the marine environment. Think like the Gulf of Mexico. There's a lot of drilling gone on there. But now we've been able to expand this idea of proven oil and natural gas due to modern technologies. So like up in Oklahoma and Texas, even in Louisiana, in these areas, you can actually extract without, you could extract when we couldn't extract before. So again, going into this idea, what about where we're drilling currently? Again, millions and millions of years ago, North Dakota and Texas were underwater because there was an inland sea. So we were located in a different spot, but also sea levels were much higher at the time, and so water was able to extend from the North Pole all the way down, current North Pole all the way down to the current Gulf of Mexico. So there was an inland sea there. So you had plankton growth that died and sank and then were covered by sediments, which again, over millions of years have now created oil and natural gas. And I forgot to mention North Dakota earlier in terms of where we currently drill, but that is a big location currently. So again, if we were to consider worldwide and global, this is looking at global proven oil reserves per country. So the darker the color here indicates the proven oil reserves, with the dark being more and kind of going down to this like yellow color being less. And so the tops here, it's not like the values aren't necessarily posted here, but the top contenders for higher oil in this order start with Venezuela, actually, then Saudi Arabia, then Canada, then Iran and Iraq, then Kuwait, UAE, Russia. The US does not come into the mix until number 11. So we are number 11 in global proven oil reserves in terms of how much is extracted. And I also want you to consider some other things here, not just where we're getting oil and natural gas, but I want you to also to consider which countries do we currently have conflict with from the United States. I know that there's a lot kind of going on globally at this time, but we don't have a very good relationship with Saudi Arabia. We don't have a great relationship with Iraq and Iran and UAE and Russia. But thankfully we have a really good relationship with Canada at the moment, so that's good. But something to really keep in mind, like if these countries didn't have oil in them, would we have conflict with them? That kind of thing. So it's also something to consider there, right? But production. So the U.S. is really where we excel in terms of producing oil. So this is looking at global crude oil and condensate production in 2023 by select countries. Again, this is from the Energy Information Administration, which is a lovely website that you'll get to use a little bit. So as you can see here, the U.S. really reigns top dog in terms of oil production. So we may not be extracting the number one amount, but we are producing the number one amount. And we're using it all, right? No, we're actually exporting a lot of it. So this is an updated graphic for our imports and exports for 2023. And what we can see here is that to all countries, we've actually exported more oil and petroleum, than have imported. So it's a net negative. So we're exporting more than we are taking in. And the countries that are getting the most of our oil, Mexico, number 1, China, number 2, Netherlands, 3, Canada, number 4, and Japan last in terms of this. I'm sure it's going elsewhere as well. I encourage you to actually check out these resources, kind of interesting, to see where our oil is going. So it's kind of a wild thing here. All right, so going back to this idea of proven oil and natural gas reserves, proven amounts actually vary a bit if we find more oil, which is kind of generally unlikely, or if we use more oil than what we're finding or extracting. So these variables can go up and down. It can also go up as new technology is developed, right? So like when we developed fracking, our reserves increased because now we're able to get more. And also what makes the extraction of oil cheaper, like that can have an impact on this as well. And the price of oil also impacts reserves, right? So perhaps, we're considering like gasoline that you get from the gas station, how those prices fluctuate. And perhaps you pay attention to price per barrel of oil that are coming in, what have you. So that can have impacts on price as well. So, and then when oil and natural gas prices drop considerably, that's usually because some of the extraction for proven oil has not become economically viable anymore. And what's kind of wild is at current extraction rates, oil will really only likely last another 30 to 40 years. Remember, non-renewable sources. Whereas natural gas, we probably have another 60 to 100 years, give or take. So a little bit wider of a range and a longer timeline for natural gas. But oil has a very soon coming up, in a sense, especially in geological time periods, deadline. Like I'm 32 years old at the time of this creation of this video. So that's really only like my lifetime left of oil. So this really, really drives home this idea that we need to start looking for other methods of energy creation and use. On top of all of that, yes, it's monetarily cheap, relatively cheap to get oil and natural gases, but the environmental costs are enormous. The two pictures here are from your book. We're looking at the Deepwater Horizon spill and explosion on the left. And air pollution on the right, so after these things have been burned. But so extraction environmental costs can be absolutely enormous. And then once we've extracted it and then used it, the environmental costs can be huge that way as well. There are other, of course, environmental costs, wildlife disruption, habitat loss, oil spills, kind of going somewhat into this idea here, occupational and community hazards. It is very, very dangerous to do underwater, deep water drilling. And folks literally do, in like little pods, in a sense, go down and make sure everything is being maintained properly, which is very, very hard on the body. And if you work out on an oil rig, you're there for months at a time. It's very taxing work, etc. But something that your book doesn't really mention, at least from what I could see, is a growing concern of noise pollution, especially with underwater drilling. So deep sea drilling is coming up a lot more often, or it's coming up in terms of ways that we can maybe go and find more oil. And there are a multitude of reasons why that is not good for the marine environments, for the oceans. So last few things I want to touch on here are unconventional oil and natural gases. Unconventional simply means it cannot be recovered by traditional wells. Thus, they're going to be using alternative techniques. One that we've gotten here is fracking, which has made made the U.S. the number one exporter of natural gas in the world. Yay. And then another way is through tar sands, which are up in Alberta, which is kind of up in this area here. And if you're like, oh, that sounds kind of familiar, well, that is where they were likely to go from. The Keystone oil pipeline was to originate basically in the tar sands up in Alberta, Canada. This is, of course, tar sands, are the most destructive and energy intensive way to extract oil. There's a lot that goes into it. I highly recommend looking further into that type of extraction if you want to learn more about it. Something that always kind of tripped me out looking at, because I'm a meteorologist, right? So I look at satellite loops all the time in my classes, especially because we do current weather discussions. And something that I noticed in North Dakota, in far western North Dakota, was this huge, at night, like this huge overlay of lights. And I was like, nobody lives there. That doesn't make any sense to me. The largest cities in North Dakota are Fargo, which is over here, Bismarck, which is here, and other towns that I don't know about. And for reference, this is Minneapolis, Minnesota. So like when I would see this, I was like, whoa, hey, hang on, that's wild. What is that? No one lives there. And this question was actually answered on Reddit. But basically, these are the shale refineries, for lack of a better word, where they where they do fracking and extraction from shale. So kind of wild. That is, in a sense, visible from space. Of course, natural gas also has enormous environmental costs. Folks have reported methane contamination, from drinking water or from leaking pipes, low birth weights and other birth defects, atmospheric methane from leaks, which is actually huge, and a really high water footprint because it's a very water intensive extraction. And then transportation issues. So when you're trying to transport natural gases, it's extraordinarily explosive. So if you have like a derailment of a train, it can go big boom, which is not great. So last things here, maybe this kind of seems like a sort of doom and gloomish, which I don't aim for it to be that. So I want to just kind of, think about ways that we can lessen our petroleum and gas consumption or addiction. So if you look at petroleum and what all it's used for, like 70% of petroleum goes into transportation costs. So, you could do things like use a more energy efficient vehicle, drive less if you can, try to buy local so it doesn't go into transportation costs of goods from really far away, but mainly consume less stuff. That's a big thing that you can do. Or if you're trying to think of ways to lessen your dependence on natural gas, which mainly goes into industrial, but energy and residential here as well, right? Things you could do would be like insulate your homes, have weather strip doors, energy efficient appliances, turn off your lights as needed, install solar, but again, buy less stuff. If you consume less, then you're not going to be using as many resources. And if we all do this, if we all lessen our consumption, then it can lessen our dependence on these fossil fuels. And then, of course, investing into renewables and diving into that realm, which I think has a lot of potential. And I think it's a route that we should really work towards and investigating new technologies with that. So thank you so much for your time and attention, and I appreciate you. Have a glorious rest of your day.